Imagine you are standing in the middle of a bustling, massive metropolis at like 3 in the morning. Usually there is a natural, expected lull in the environment, right?
Right, absolutely.
The streets empty out, the neon lights dim, the traffic just sort of fades to a low hum. The city essentially takes a breath, clears out the clutter of the previous day, and prepares for the next. It is a built-in rhythm.
Yeah, it is the essential downtime that almost every complex functioning system relies on. I mean, a system cannot constantly exert outward energy without an internal period of consolidation and repair.
Exactly. But now imagine someone locates a giant master switch for that city and just flips it. Suddenly, it is high noon. Every single street lamp, every massive billboard, every office building is blazing at absolute full capacity. Yeah. You look up and there is no dusk, no midnight, no dawn.
Oh, wow. Just relentless, glaring, uninterrupted daylight pouring down on the streets.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder, like, what happens to the life inside a system when you completely eliminate the night? Can you actually force endless productivity and continuous growth simply by keeping the lights on forever?
It is a really profound question.
It is. And welcome to today's deep dive, where we are answering that question just for you. Our mission today is to extract the hidden wisdom from a very specific, seemingly niche piece of source material.
Yeah.
We are looking at a dispatch from May 21st, 2026, titled Continuous Illumination and Duckweed Resilience.
Right, and this document comes from a larger series called Notes on Fishkeeping, specifically Part 262. It is written by a dedicated hobbyist or perhaps an independent researcher named Ang.
Yeah, and Ang is asking that exact question about the consequences of endless daylight, but on a microscopic biological scale inside an aquarium. And while this is contained within a simple fish tank, I mean, the implications stretch far beyond aquatic plants.
They really do. The observations Ang records touch on fundamental rules of biology. They map out the architecture of resilience and expose the ultimate limits of pushing, well, any living system to its absolute extreme.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand the impact of eliminating the night, we have to look closely at the exact parameters of Ang's experiment.
Hmm.
Ang has taken a very specific aquatic plant, duckweed.
Right.
If you have never seen it, duckweed is that tiny, bright green plant that floats on the surface of ponds and aquariums.
Hmm.
It multiplies rapidly to form this dense mat. Ang has subjected this unassuming little plant to a 24-hour LED light cycle.
Yeah, in botanical terms, this is referred to as an extended photo period.
Yeah.
Or as Ang accurately points out in the notes, continuous illumination. The sun effectively never sets on this specific patch of duckweed.
Never sets.
Right. The biological trigger for nighttime has been completely removed from its environment.
And at the time this dispatch was written, Ang notes that the experiment has been running for exactly 3 days. 3 days of nonstop blazing LED light. And the immediate outward visible result is striking. Ang writes that the duckweed appears to be, quote, flourishing.
Yeah.
It is just exploding with new growth.
What's fascinating here is that, according to the background research Ang outlines, this initial result is not an anomaly. It is an entirely expected physiological response.
Right, really?
Oh, absolutely. The continuous light triggers an immediate, massive burst of rapid cell division. The plant is taking in a constant stream of energy and frantically converting it into new biomass.
It reminds me of like a college student pulling a multi-day, all-nighter fueled by endless energy drinks.
That is a great comparison.
Right, because outwardly, the immediate output looks incredible. The student's typing a mile a minute, the pages are piling up, and it seems like they've discovered a brilliant hack to completely bypass the biological need for rest. Like they're cheating the system and getting away with it.
Yes, but that outward appearance creates a very dangerous illusion.
How so?
Because an observer sees that 3-day trajectory, the flourishing, the rapid multiplication in human nature, immediately dictates that we extrapolate that line straight up into infinity. We look at the data and assume that if 3 days of continuous light doubles the plant mass, 30 days of continuous light will yield an absolute jungle.
Oh, I see.
It tricks the observer into believing that continuous input directly equals continuous output forever without any diminishing returns.
Which brings a critical contrast into focus. Ang explicitly compares aquatic plants, like our flourishing duckweed, with mammals. The notes emphasize that mammalian biology is governed by a strict circadian rhythm.
Right. Mammals are bound by an internal 24-hour clock running in the background of their neurology. It cycles between sleepiness and alertness at regular intervals.
It dictates everything, right? Hormone release, digestion.
Exactly. Body temperature, cognitive function. It acts as a rigid, unyielding master over the organism.
And because duckweed is an aquatic plant, and lacks that mammalian neurology, Ang is testing its specific resilience to see if it can operate outside of those typical biological bounds.
Right.
But despite the early 3-day flourishing, Ang notes a biological inevitability waiting in the future. Eventually, the text states, the plant is going to hit a stagnation point where the duckweed will completely stop multiplying.
Yes. The stagnation point represents the exact moment the illusion of infinite scaling just shatters. The biological machinery simply ceases to produce new growth.
Okay, wait, I have to push back a little on the premise of this inevitable crash, or at least play devil's advocate for a second.
Sir, go ahead.
If duckweed doesn't have a brain or a nervous system to enforce a sleep cycle like mammals do,
Yeah.
I mean, if it doesn't hallucinate or experience cognitive decline without sleep, why can't it just keep photosynthesizing as long as the light is present?
That is a totally fair question.
Like, what is physically stopping a tiny floating leaf from just absorbing endless light? It seems a bit presumptive to assume it shares our biological boundaries.
Yeah. And that is the core biological puzzle Ang is observing. You are right, the duckweed lacks the complex, strict, neurological circadian guardrails of a mammal. A mammal's brain will forcibly shut the body down to demand sleep.
Right.
The plant lacks that central governor, which is the precise reason it can sustain that initial explosive growth for 3 days. It simply keeps absorbing the light and driving the photosynthetic engine.
So it has no built-in off switch to stop the intake.
Exactly. It has no off switch. But biology across the entire spectrum demands balance. From complex mammals to the simplest floating leaves, a system cannot function purely on input.
Oh, okay.
Without periodic dark intervals, that stagnation point isn't just a possibility, it is a guaranteed physiological bottleneck. The plant might not need neurological sleep, but it requires downtime to process the sheer volume of energy it has taken in.
What exactly is it processing during the dark?
Well, during the light phase, the plant is actively photosynthesizing, creating sugars. But during the dark phase, it respires. It moves those sugars through its cellular structure and begins essential internal repairs.
Oh, wow. So removing the dark removes the maintenance phase entirely. The plant hits the stagnation point because it is physically choked by its own unprocessed energy.
That is exactly it. The incoming energy simply has nowhere to go. The internal pathways become entirely gridlocked by the overproduction of the light phase.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I want to look at this biological gridlock through a different lens. Think of this continuous illumination like a wildly busy restaurant kitchen.
Okay, I like that.
The LED light acts as the constant stream of incoming order tickets. The cooks are throwing food on the plates, working at maximum capacity, driving incredible output. But the periodic dark intervals, Ang mentions, those act as the crucial closing time for that kitchen.
Right, the interval where the actual operation of the kitchen is sustained rather than just the output of the food?
Yes, because if the orders never stop coming, the kitchen staff never gets a chance to take out the trash, wipe down the grease from the counters, or prep the stations for the next day.
It would be a disaster.
Total disaster. Eventually, the kitchen doesn't shut down because they ran out of ingredients. It shuts down because the garbage is piled up to the ceiling, the floors are too slick to walk on, and the environment has become completely toxic to the workers inside it. The constant production creates a toxic byproduct that halts the entire system.
That captures the biological mechanism perfectly. Because when Ang discusses the physical consequences of denying the duckweed its dark interval, the text points directly to oxidative damage.
Oxidative damage.
Yes, this is the cellular equivalent of that trash piling up in the kitchen.
And the notes describe this damage manifesting as the literal decay of the plant's fronds. Ang specifically warns that the leaves will undergo yellowing or browning. The plant isn't just pausing its growth, it is physically deteriorating.
Yeah, oxidative damage is basically a state of severe stress at the microscopic level. During photosynthesis, the plant naturally produces reactive oxygen species, essentially free radicals.
Right, I have heard of free radicals.
Yeah, they are highly unstable molecules that act like, well, microscopic rust inside the cells. Under normal conditions, during the dark intervals, the plant produces specific enzymes to sweep up and neutralize thus toxic byproducts.
Thus, the dark is not merely an absence of light or some passive downtime where the plant does nothing.
No, not at all. It is an intensely active, required interval for the plant's survival. The dark is when the biological cleaning crew arrives.
Wow.
When you subject the duckweed to continuous illumination, those free radicals accumulate endlessly. The sweeping enzymes just cannot keep up with the constant production.
So the oxidative damage, Eng predicts, is the ultimate penalty for ignoring natural biological limits.
Exactly. The very element driving the plant's explosive growth, the light, becomes the toxic agent that destroys its cellular walls, leading to the yellowing and browning on the surface.
The cure becomes the poison, simply because of the unrelenting duration.
Yeah.
The system is denied its required balancing force, and it begins to consume itself from the inside out.
It is a stark reality. True resilience is widely misunderstood, I think. We often measure resilience by how much punishment or continuous input a system can endure before breaking.
Right, like how much can you take?
Exactly. But biological resilience actually requires the space to process and recover. Without the dark, the duckweed has no capacity for resilience at all.
This shifts the entire narrative of the dispatch, from the botanical science to the human element behind the glass. We need to talk about the mindset of Eng, the author meticulously recording these notes on fish keeping.
Yeah, Eng's perspective is fascinating.
It is. The text is very clear that this grim outcome, the oxidative damage, the cellular rust, the inevitable yellowing and browning, is already a known scientific reality. Eng has read the literature. The theory of the crash is fully established before the LED light is even turned on.
Right. Eng is not entering this experiment blind. The destructive trajectory of an extended photoperiod is a known botanical fact.
So if you already know the plant is going to suffer and decay, why continue to run the experiment? Why leave the light on?
Well,
Eng writes, quote, "Even so, I'm curious to see how many days we can maintain this prolonged exposure before the duckweed starts yellowing or browning. The exact timeline of the failure is currently a mystery. Eng promises to reveal that specific number in the coming days or weeks in future journal posts."
right. The motivation is pure, unadulterated curiosity. It is the desire to take an abstract concept from a textbook and witness its physical manifestation in reality.
So what does this all mean? I have immense admiration for this specific type of grassroots scientific method.
Oh, same here.
There is something profound about knowing the overarching theory of the crash, understanding the inevitability of the decay, but possessing the patience and the discipline to just sit there and watch the clock. Eng isn't intervening to save the plant. Eng is simply observing the threshold.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Eng's Fishkeeping Journal represents the purest essence of empirical observation. Modern understanding often relies heavily on accepted models and generalized rules. We accept that a plant will suffer without a photoperiod.
Because the book says so.
Exactly. But Eng is taking that generalized rule and asking, yes, but exactly when?
Finding the precise numerical reality in a controlled environment.
Yes. Eng is actively stress testing the theory in real time. The goal is to map the exact coordinates of that stagnation point. Finding the razor-thin boundary between absolute maximum output and complete systemic failure requires a staggering level of focus.
It really does.
The mere fact that this dispatch is labeled Part 262 speaks volumes about Eng's dedication to the slow, methodical process of observation.
To write 262 entries about the microscopic events inside a fish tank takes a profound willingness to sit with the process for weeks or months. It shows that the joy for Eng isn't simply in maintaining a visually pleasing aquarium.
Right.
The joy is found in understanding the invisible mechanical laws governing the life inside it.
It is a deeply meditative approach to interacting with the natural world, demanding an attention span that few people cultivate these days.
We started this deep dive looking at a seemingly simple, almost niche 3-day test on some tiny floating duckweed under a 24-hour LED. But from that single glowing fish tank, we have extracted a vital lesson about the nature of growth and limitation.
A huge lesson.
We saw the trap of the illusion of rapid scaling, how an initial burst of flourishing can trick an observer into expecting an infinite upward trajectory.
Right, the initial data completely masks the underlying strain on the organism.
We explored the absolute necessity of dark intervals, understanding them not as empty or passive time, but as highly active periods of vital maintenance. And we examined the unavoidable destructive reality of oxidative damage, the cellular rust and toxic buildup that occurs when a biological system is denied its natural rhythm and forced into continuous operation.
The plant physically burns itself out, attempting to process an endless day, choked by the waste products of its own productivity.
For you listening right now, I encourage you to reflect on the value of this knowledge in your own context. Whether you are prepping for a massive multi-week project at work, studying relentlessly for impending exams, or you are just someone who is intensely curious about how the intricate pieces of our world fit together,
It applies to all of us.
It does. Eng's fishkeeping notes offer a perfect, contained microcosm of how systems react to continuous, unrelenting pressure. You simply cannot leave the lights on forever and expect the flourishing to last. The biology always demands a balance.
The duckweed initially thrives under constant light, completely obscuring the fact that it is hurtling toward profound oxidative decay. It makes you wonder, how often in our own lives do we mistake an initial burst of unsustainable, frantic productivity for long-term flourishing? How often do we celebrate the rapid output, completely ignoring the inevitable yellowing and browning that waits just around the corner when we deny ourselves the dark?